There is a lot going on in Washington on the foreign policy front. There's Greenland, Venezuela, revolution in Iran. Congressman George Latimer is on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. But because on Friday the president threatened tariffs against people, countries that won't go along with Greenland, I'd like to start with what's going on and how the president wants to take control of Greenland. Your reaction to that?
I think it's an ego move rather than an intelligent strategic move, Marcia. We have a treaty with Denmark, 1951, in which Denmark agreed to allow us to place whatever military assets we need on Greenland. Do we need another naval port? Do we need tracking devices and so forth? With all of that, it's like the door is open and the welcome mat is out. We don't need to seize it either involuntarily or even pay for to own it as a U.S.-owned land. And I think he wants to just expand the empire. I think the same reason why Vladimir Putin goes into Ukraine or Chairman Xi has cast his eyes on Taiwan is the same reason why he wants Greenland. He wants more land. He wants to be able to say, I expanded America. I want us to have strategic placement of material that we need, and that, and only that.
But do you buy his argument that we need Greenland to protect the fact that Russia could take it over?
No. No.
Why not?
If Russia were to move on Greenland, they're moving on a NATO country. We have an agreement with NATO and all the other countries, which includes England and France and so forth, that any action by Russia against NATO member will get a response from all the NATO members. So if Russia were to make move one on Greenland, then the United States would be responding immediately. No different than if we owned it. Same thing.
But see, that's the question. A lot of people that are concerned about this are afraid that it could fracture the NATO alliance.
Absolutely it could. And that would be Vladimir Putin's greatest dream. Because what he doesn't want to see is Ukraine join NATO and NATO be stronger. Donald Trump has for a long time been unhappy with NATO. He wants people to pay their fair share. I suppose that's a reasonable argument. But NATO, since the end of World War II, has been a bulwark against Russian aggression. But if it was smart for Dwight Eisenhower, Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and George H.W. Bush, why isn't it smart for Donald Trump? His party, as well as my party, have understood the value of NATO in helping American interests. And now we want to potentially destroy American interests. We want to attack sovereign land of Denmark. That's insane.
Well, let me ask you this. There is an ulterior motive that some people look at, and that is the rare earth minerals that are in Greenland. Mm-hmm. And the president has expressed an interest in obtaining some mineral rights. And so I'm asking, do you think this is about the economy, or is it about defense of America?
Well, it's not about the economy. I think if, as he may have shown with oil in Venezuela, it may be about minerals as well as a strategic location. But the same thing applies as it would with military programs. You negotiate with the country of Denmark. You determine that we'd like to extract certain minerals, and you pay a price for it. But the bottom line is you could have access to those minerals, but you just have to do it cooperatively. You can't demand it. And I think he believes now that the U.S. military, which is the strongest in the world, the finest, most bravest men and women in the world, are his play toy, that he can start to move around. He threatens Colombia, Mexico. This is not what America is.
Well, you know, there's sort of an interesting thing that's happening, because also on Friday we learned that not only Denmark, but other NATO countries like Germany, France, England are moving troops into Greenland because of this threat. Right. What kind of a message does that send to the world that other NATO powers have to move their troops into Greenland to protect against the United States, who's a member of the NATO alliance?
The message that it sends is America under this president has lost their mind. He stood up in front of the United Nations and insulted the other countries of the world. These are people that you want friendships with. We know that we're in a competition against China, a military, technology, influence competition. You need those other countries to be allies to you. And you don't gain their allyship by insulting them, but we did that. We've insulted our closest friend on the planet, Canada. Canada is like your kid brother who loves you, and you've insulted them time and time again. And you've done it again now in the case of Denmark. It shows a misunderstanding. And this is one of the problems you have. I know people say, I want outsiders in government. We want people who come out with a different mindset. And there are examples. Mike Bloomberg, who takes over the mayoralty of New York, and he shows tremendous skill in being able to run the city. But Donald Trump never spent a minute as a governor or a mayor or any other position in public office. He disdains the public back and forth, the check and balance of government. He disdains it. He had absolute power heading the Trump organization. He wants the same kind of power in Washington.
How does this square, though, with many Republicans who believe in America first, that we should be focusing on America and not foreign interests all over the world? Doesn't that alienate them?
It does, and you just saw Marjorie Taylor Greene make that point. No one was a more vociferous supporter of Donald Trump than Marjorie Taylor Greene. And when she left Congress in her farewell speech and in the things she said subsequently, she made that point that she didn't want foreign entanglements. If you go back to the George W. Bush administration, getting into Iraq, getting into Afghanistan, there were reasons to do certain things there, but not to be there for 20 years or as long as we were. And that was a reaction. And now we're doing the same thing, or potentially in Venezuela.
But as I was going to just say, it's not just Greenland. There's Venezuela, and then there's the possibility of Iran. But let's talk about Venezuela. Should Congress have had a say in whether or not we went into Venezuela and arrested Maduro?
Right. We should have had a say in it. At least certainly the leadership should have commented on it. But no one defends Maduro. Maduro's a bad guy. He's done bad things. But when the United States of America, not one president, decides that there's going to be regime change and he does it on his own, that is a bad sign. Whether that's a constitutional act or not, I can't say, but those are the questions you have to ask. The real problem with Venezuela is, where do we go from here? We saw that we could not, once we took Saddam Hussein off of the throne in Iraq, we could manage the mess that came afterwards. We saw that in Afghanistan, we could sort of take the Taliban out of power, but 20 years later, we couldn't subdue the country and the Taliban came back. And the same thing is likely to happen in Venezuela right now. We have no plan. There's no understanding of how we go from here to there to a greater democracy. He never talked about democracy in his speech. He talked about oil.
Well, I was going to talk about that. So is this another economic thing? Because he's talking about American companies getting their hands on what could be one of the largest oil reserves in the world.
He made a point, and I've read his book, The Art of the Deal. He made a point about talking about transactions, and when you do these transactions and you negotiate from a position of greater strength, and the person that you're transacting with has to meet you on your terms. That does not reflect what a worldwide diplomacy requires. You have long-term interests, and your long-term interests are not served by you dealing with a short-term interest like, I get some benefit out of this transaction today and tomorrow. You leave behind a residual of negativity. If you believe, as I do, that we are in a worldwide competition for dominance in every sphere with China, we do ourselves damage in the long term. You could look back, I don't know that I'm going to be on the planet in 30 years, but 30 years from now, you'll look back on the Trump presidency and you'll say, that's when we alienated Western Europe. That's when we alienated Latin America. And so now we're in a position where we need their support in a battle with China, and it's not there. They trust us and China, equally the same.
So after Venezuela, is Cuba next?
He's ruminated about Cuba, Mexico, Colombia. This is an example of a person who is just irresponsibly thinking out loud and trying to, sort of swagger and perhaps get some benefits by the threats that he makes. We need a sensible, stable foreign policy that highlights that what we're interested in is not the mineral deposits of Greenland or the oil of Venezuela, but we want a stable world. We want a world where the bad actors of the world, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, are either neutralized or placed in a situation where they're not able to put their will on the free countries of the world. And we should support democracy around the world. Not an easy thing to do. That principle was in effect when Ronald Reagan, Republican, said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. When Jack Kennedy stood in front of that wall and said, Ich bin ein Berliner, that was a consistent American policy. It's all different now under this president who decides that he can decide any morning who gets a tariff, who doesn't get a tariff. That's not American democracy.
Is that a policy that's going to work?
I think in the long run it does not. There may be some short-term benefits that he gets. And keep in mind, when you use tariffs as a political tool, not as a financial tool to level the playing field, you and I pay for the money. We go to the store and we buy something, the price of it's gone up because they've slapped a tariff on that product.
Everybody knows that.
And I think there's a political price to pay. Now, my Republican colleagues across the aisle, many of them are good people.
We're going to have to leave it right there for now. But up next, Staten Island Congresswoman Nicole Maliotakis. we are back with Congressman George Latimer. So I'd like to continue the conversation. I wonder, you know, like when the president says he has designs on Greenland, or he goes into Venezuela, or he might want to take over Cuba, Mexico, whatever the places are, what does that do to the worldview of America as a bastion of democracy and as something that people have held up to the world as an example of how government should work?
It destroys our moral advantage that we have in this world. When we went in to take Saddam Hussein in Iraq out of Kuwait, we did that because it was the morally right thing to do. We put our money and our treasure of people to do that. And we showed a standard around the world. When we went into Grenada and we tried to right a ship down there, those types of actions, those were much smaller than what we did in World War II, which was free, you know, Europe and Asia. We showed that we have a standard. We're different from Russia and from China, who are just strong men who want as much land as possible. We lose that advantage when you start to play this game. And he makes a terrible mistake. He thinks that fear is the same thing as respect. The respect that America has is not just because we're a military power or an economic power, but we're a model to look up to, the shining city on the hill. We've never fully achieved that, but that's the aspirational element of it. And he throws that out the door for what? For barrels of oil? Because he wants to have more land. He wants to strut along the world scene with a bit more swagger. But you know, this is who he is. We've seen this in the New York City real estate market. I'm old enough to remember 40 some odd years ago when he would do this, and that's why he didn't have great partners in the banking community or other partners in real estate, because they saw how he behaved. Now he's doing it for the United States of America. Big mistake.
So what do you see happening in Iran? I mean, there's revolution there. Do you see that the regime falls? And what would be our role?
Well,
what's the right role for America as this happens?
It's a good question. I wouldn't want to be flip about it, but what I'm concerned about is that when you watch what he's done in other situations, he might believe that some airstrikes will do the trick. You go in with some military and you blow up some places and perhaps you take some of the leadership out. But then the instability of the country follows your departure. So what a more mature president would do is he would talk to our allies and come up with some game plan as to what this would look like that involves other countries of the world, not just the United States acting unilaterally.
So is there regime change, and who is that person or people?
And the problem is the regime that you have now that came in 1979 has a religious element to it. It is a religious situation. And so to resume a secular government, say under the Shah's son or something like that, is going to require a whole interaction with the Iranian people, because they're angry with what they have, but we don't know that they're prepared to go back and accept something else.
And what do they want?
Right. And there's been no dialogue. When he went into Venezuela, he had no dialogue with either side of the issue. He knew that Maduro stood in the way of him getting access to the oil that he wanted, and Maduro would hold him hostage, and he
also characterized it, I think, as an attempt to go after the drugs that were coming from Venezuela, and also the gang Trenta Armas that were creating a big problem.
A couple
for
of
the
things.
country.
First of all, if you want to punish people who've been involved in the drug trade, then why did you pardon Hernandez from Honduras? You just pardoned him a couple of months ago, and there's arguments about why you did it that aren't particularly policy driven. So that belies that. And as far as going after the gangs, in his immigration policy stateside, they've made the argument, Kristi Noem makes the argument that we're going after gangs. You're not going after gangs. You're going after guys who are dishwashers and peaceably trying to make a better living in the United States. Why? Because they put up less of a fight. If you want to go after the true hardcore gangs, you get some of those ICE guys who want to muscle up and they want to get into it, fine. You put a team of those people up to go after the gangs, but you didn't do that. And when you went into Venezuela, you didn't show a desire to defang the gangs of Venezuela either. As long as you get your oil, I think you're kind of happy. But you're going to have to stabilize. If you want to get that oil out, you're going to have to stabilize the country somehow, because the oil company is not going to come in and make a big investment to pull some of those billions of barrels for nothing.
So what's the answer in Venezuela? The president supported the Maduro's vice president to come and run the country. But just as last week in Washington, the leader of the opposition came courting, I guess is the best word you would describe it, by bringing him her Nobel Peace Prize.
Unbelievable.
But why did we decide to support the vice president if we thought Maduro was bad? And should we support the opposition leader?
I think his thinking was realpolitik. I just took your president out. You're the new president. I can take you out. Give me the oil. That's what I care about. I don't care about democracy. I care about give me the oil.
So basically he wanted a puppet?
Well, I think he didn't care much about what happens in Venezuela in the aftermath of this action. I think if the current president, who came from the vice presidency, I guess she's acting president, whatever her title is, if she will make sure that we get the oil, he's fine with that. And then whatever she does domestically, that's up to her, how she handles the gangs and how she handles the immense poverty. There's 30 million Venezuelans, 80% of them are in poverty. That's a huge problem. Wow. He has no intent of trying to deal with that problem. He wouldn't deal with the poverty in the United States, much less what he has in Venezuela. So look, I think, and I'm not trying to sound like just a critic, I try to be thoughtful about these things. I look for what is the thinking behind it. What's the stream of philosophy that benefits the United States of America? And I don't see it. I don't see it.
You know, the big issue for both parties is going to be control of the House in 2026, this year in November. Do any of these foreign policy issues help Republicans in their quest to stay in control, or is it something that the Democrats will use against them?
Well, you have 10 months between now and Election Day, and as any of us, you follow it intensely, and I participate in it. 10 months is a lifetime. It's 100
Absolutely
years.
True.
So anything can happen, any other incident. He has the capacity to open up another 2 or 3 or 4 fronts that aren't the ones now, and those could be the issues of the day. Certainly, if you're a Venezuelan expat and you're living in the United States, in Florida, you're happy that he took Maduro out. So as of today, you'd probably vote for him and his candidates. Right. On the other hand, where are you going to be in 6 or 8 months if the country descends into madness?
Right.
And then, and how will that feel? These congressional races, I've run only one congressional race, but I've run a lot of other races. They are in one part the individual competition between you and the other person, and they're in another part a referendum on how you view the national parties and so forth. And I've learned over my career that if you have a strong enough candidate who connects well enough with the electorate, that can become the dominant situation. Roy Cooper, former governor, running for the Senate in North Carolina, regardless of what the National Democratic, regardless, but in most possible cases, can win the referendum of, I vote to send Roy Cooper to Washington. Sherrod Brown can win Ohio on the basis of him and his reputation, and there are other examples of that out there. Now, in House races, you know, it's not seen from the top down the same way, but I work the streets of my district all the time. You can always lose. You can always be primaried. I launched a primary against a person who once had a primary against somebody else. So the primaries are always a possibility. But when you get to the general election, if you're in a position where you understand your district and you look at the issues that affect them, the economic issues affect them, they care about what's happening to the health care if the health care goes up.
That's what I was going to ask you about next. How will health care play in 2026, given the fact that just this last week, the president announced what he called a great health care plan that he thinks is going to help Americans get low-cost health care?
Well, look, the Republicans in general, and this president in particular, cannot accept the fact that the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, was authored by somebody that they want to vilify and reduce the legacy of. Obamacare is popular. 7 of 10 Republicans wanted the ACA tax credits to be extended.
So why wasn't it extended?
Well, because they originally did it on a political basis. They had the belief philosophically repeal and replace, but they never had a replace piece to it.
But they kept saying it was because there was fraud in the system.
Well, and there's fraud, there's waste and everything. I'm not sure. They haven't proved fraud. They assert fraud and they assert corruption.
And
I can assert corruption on transactions with crypto coins that may be in the president's possession. I can assert corruption, but I can't prove it. The reality is the big, beautiful, ugly bill that they voted for and they praised, now they're having to undo. That's exactly what the ACA credits. That's only a part of the health care problem. They have big cuts to Medicaid, which are going to hurt millions of people, which don't trigger until 27. But once people realize that they played with your health care and the ACA tax credits, the impact of the Medicaid is coming as well.
But right now, people who have gotten their health care through Obamacare are having huge increases in premiums.
Well,
so even if he has this new health care plan, it's not going to affect those who got their health care through
Well, his health care plan
Obamacare.
is his response, but the Senate, I'm told, is working on a version of what the House passed. It may not be a 3-year extension, and you know, in a law, you can make something retroactive.
So are you thinking that there will be an extension?
I do. I think that the Senate will come up with some version of a bill. It might be different from the one that the House passed. We'll have to see how much it differs.
But how does that jibe with the president's new health care plan?
I think we look at it and go, that's a nice plan, Mr. President, but that's not where we're at right now. We're going to restore the ACA health, the credits, and then we're going to have an analysis of your plan and every other plan that's out there to deal with the macro issue of health care, because the macro issue of health care brings back in Medicaid, Medicare, and I don't doubt, Marcia, that there are financial costs to these programs that in out years are going to be problematic. But you get reasonable people to negotiate it. You just don't end it. You know, if your arm is hurting you, you don't cut it off. You get the repair necessary, and you do therapy, and you get the arm back into situation. I think that's the purpose of a Congress, to be able to discuss these things and have people with different viewpoints work through it, not rubber stamp what someone in the White House wants.
So your argument, I think, would be that it's better government to have Republicans control one house and Democrats control the other?
Not necessarily. It depends on how you operate. I would say this: the Republicans have shown you, when given full power for 10 months, how they operated. No negotiation with the Democrats, and not just in these issues, but in a host of other issues. The SAVE Act that changes the way people can register to vote. A host of issues that deal with immigration and other issues. So they have, I believe, lost the confidence of the majority of Americans. When they won in 24, they won by about 2% nationwide in the presidential race, and they won a couple of House seats more, and they won a few more Senate seats. That was not a mandate. They treated it like a mandate, and now I think if the Democrats can come back, run capable candidates, and show a mindset that would undo the worst, and then have a positive message of what we will do on utility costs, food costs, all these other issues, then I think the Democrats can regain the authority. And if we have the authority, then we have to execute along the lines that we've promised, so that people know. That was my experience in local government. That's what I could do in Westchester County. That's what I hope we can do in the country.
I guess the question is this: how would government change? How would the output from Washington change if the Democrats managed to take control of the House? Would there be actual change, or would there be dysfunction because Republicans and Democrats have had trouble striking a deal?
Well, the first thing you have to judge is, what kind of a margin of control do we have? Do we have a 5-seat margin, which makes any 5 people king, or do we have a much larger margin than that? There will still be a Republican in the White House, and so there's going to have to be bipartisan negotiation, even if we have both houses of the Congress.
Are people in Washington capable of bipartisan negotiations that end up with a deal?
I think if you see an electoral result, I don't know that we're going to have a blue tsunami. Some people predict it. It's too soon to say if it's a tsunami. I think we win back the House. But if you get a blue tsunami, if you see people who are otherwise safe Republican senators lose their seats, and there's this tremendous tipping, and if we win the House by a huge number of seats, then the message to the remaining Republicans is, you did it your way, and the American people turned you off. Now, how do you turn it back on with some reasonable discussion? And we have our disagreements in the Democratic Party. We'll see how they play out, in the days to come. I, understand that there are people that, want to see more of a socialist type of attitude. I don't necessarily attach to that. So I think there's debate within the Democratic Party about what we present. But I've been experienced a long time in a lot of other levels of government. And every time we negotiate, we get a better result. When you try to impose with will, which is what's happening in the White House and what's happened with the 2 houses by the Republican leadership, you wind up overplaying your hand and you get a negative result. And if that happens on election day, then that will be the message. Stop what you're doing, start working together.
How optimistic are you that your optimistic view of government can happen?
Slightly optimistic.
On that note, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Marcia. It's always a pleasure.
And thank you at home for joining us as well.